Whenever somebody is coming into the ball python breeding hobby, whether it is just as a pet keeper or as an entry-level breeder, it is absolutely critical that they buy from reputable breeders. But when you are new and you don't really know anybody in the hobby, it's really hard to understand what makes somebody a good breeder and what makes somebody a garbage breeder. So for this week's video, we want to go over some of the different patterns that you can use in order to recognize a good breeder or a garbage breeder, regardless of whether or not they have a really big name. My name's Steven with Leviathan Snakes, and let's jump in. We're going to start off with the garbage breeders because it's a little bit more negative and it allows us to end this video on a positive note. But one thing I do need to say for both the garbage and the good breeders that we're going to be talking about, these are patterns of behavior, because any one aspect of these could apply to either a good breeder or a garbage breeder in one specific circumstance. But instead of looking at the exceptions, if we're looking at their entire business, what they are known for, this is going to give us a much better idea of who exactly these different types of breeders are. On garbage breeders, the very first thing that we want to look at and we want to analyze are their animals. And this is much easier done if you are in person at a show, but you can get a little bit of an idea online as well. But first we're gonna start on the show. So let's say that you come up to a show and you see animals that are obviously sick, that they have respiratory infections, that they are infested with mites, things like this. So this is a pretty big red flag that just about everybody will understand and know that if somebody has a bunch of sick animals on their table, they're probably not the best breeder. And when it comes to this situation, you might be tempted to rescue these animals because you believe that you could give them a better life. But I personally believe that this is not really a good viable option because one, it puts your other animals that you already own at risk. So I saw on Instagram today that it looks like that there is a string of nidovirus going through in like the Midwest shows, and that's super scary. And the idea that that could happen anywhere, if you see an animal that you think is visibly sick, I do not believe you should buy that animal under any circumstances. And in addition to your own animals, the idea that this person, this breeder, is willing to put out sick animals for sale means that they are either not paying very much attention to their own animals, and if they're not paying very much attention, how are they going to be able to give them the adequate care that they need, or that they don't care and that they're just trying to push it off on somebody else. And either one of these situations isn't really somebody that I personally would want to support. On the animal subject, sickness isn't the only thing, because there are also indications, at least when we're talking about ball pythons, of how well they're being kept, and one of this is stuck shed. So I think that just about everybody who keeps ball pythons at some point is going to have an animal with stuck shed. But if you are at a show and animals are for sale, in my opinion, if somebody's putting out an animal for sale that is covered with stuck shed, that's a really big red flag, and it's a sign that they're probably not the best breeder, because why wouldn't they try to rectify that situation before they put that animal in front of the public where they're trying to sell it? And then last one on here is the weight of the animal. So when it comes to ball pythons, at least in our case, because that's what we know, if you're trying to buy a ball python and it is 2 years old, but even though it's 2 years old, it weighs 200 grams, that is a sign that that seller, that breeder, whoever had that animal, wasn't really feeding that animal because they were just trying to keep it alive just long enough so that way they could sell it. And because it went for 2 years without it being sold, and the fact that it's still 200 grams, it's a sign that that animal hasn't been being fed properly, and that is also an indication indication of the breeder themselves. The fact that just because they want to sell the animal, that they are willing to skimp on the expenses of taking care of it in order to maintenance feed it. In my opinion, if there's an animal on Morph Market or at a show, it doesn't really matter, and that animal is 2, 3, 4 years old, there is no excuse for it to be 200 grams. And again, when it comes to online sales, you can see this pretty often where you can see animals that were posted 2 years ago and are still about the size of a hatchling. The second area that you can use as a way to identify garbage breeders is whether or not that specific breeder is cutting corners in other aspects of their business. So if you are at a show and you find a breeder who wasn't willing to invest in a tablecloth and that they just have random animals put out on the table, and maybe they're not even using deli cups, they're just using like Tupperware containers, that in my opinion is a sign that they weren't willing to invest in the marketing and the presentation of their sales. And if they're not willing to do that, what other areas were they skimping on for their exact animals? So I think that if you come into situations like this where you can find people who are not putting everything they can to show how proud they are to have their business, how proud they are to be breeding animals, it's a sign that they are probably a little cheap. And if they're a little cheap in those areas which are 100% driving their revenue, it's very likely they're trying to cheap out on other areas that are related to the husbandry and health of their animals. Red flag number 3 is that this person, this breeder, has very, very poor customer service. And maybe they are very standoffish. Maybe they're a little aggressive to people, or they're so negative that they're kind of complaining about everybody else in the hobby, all of these new people coming in, and in the same breath, they're trying to sell their whatever animal they have to new people in the hobby, despite the fact that it seems like they hate them. So in this situation, I think that this is a pattern that they're probably not very happy with how the hobby is going for them. And if they're not very happy, they likely don't have the passion that they once had, and therefore, again, probably are not keeping up with all of the animals, or certainly the customers if the customer has an issue. The last sign that I want to talk about when it comes to garbage breeders is that when there is a shortfall, whether this is they didn't make very many sales, or that there was an issue with a customer, or there was an issue with an animal, that there is always an excuse and there is always a reason why it's everybody else's fault and it's never their responsibility. And again, I think that if you see this time and time again, it's not just one isolated occurrence, this is a pattern of behavior. This shows that this is somebody who is not willing to take any responsibility for mistakes, mishaps, whether or not they are on the customer's part or on their own part. And coupled with everything else that we've talked about, it's very likely that this type of breeder would try to ruin somebody else's reputation before taking responsibility for their own actions. Switching over to the positive side of this, we want to talk about good breeders. And just like we did with the bad breeders, we want to talk about their animals first. So when it comes to a good breeder, oftentimes a good breeder is going to have very healthy animals. And this doesn't mean that a good breeder only ever raises healthy animals, and if you have a sick animal, you're automatically a bad breeder. Instead, if you are going to be a good breeder and selling animals to the public, you're only selling the animals that you are 100% positive are good on their bill of health. So if there is a situation where a good breeder were to get mites or something like that, that doesn't mean that they're ruined and that their entire career in the reptile hobby is over. Instead, that good breeder is not going to be selling any animals during that time. They're going to take them all down off of Morph Market. They're not going to be vending shows, and they're going to do everything that they can to eradicate the problem so that way they can get it fixed and they're not passing it on to somebody else. In addition to the health of the animals, I think that good breeders usually go above and beyond in order to make sure that their animals are the perfect fit for their customers. So if we're talking about the pet segment, it is much, much more common for people to feed pet ball pythons frozen thawed, but feeding frozen thawed takes a lot more time and a lot more work, and it also produces a lot more more waste than feeding live rodents. So ball python breeders that are specifically catering to the pet segment, and they are willing to put in the extra effort to make sure that they are feeding their animals frozen thawed, that's a really, really good sign that they are trying to make sure that the pet customer is going to have the best chance of success and the best experience with that specific animal. The last sign that I want to talk about on the animal aspect of good breeders is a little bit controversial in the breeding part of the hobby. And that is that I believe that good breeders are going to do everything they can to help out the well-being of the animal, including enrichment. And the reason why this is a little bit controversial is in the ball python breeding hobby, there is a debate between whether or not enrichment is necessary or if it's just something extra that doesn't really do anything. And in our opinion is that even if there wasn't any like 100% proven health benefits of enrichment, the fact that it isn't hurting the animal and it could be helping out their quality of life is 100% a good thing. And breeders that take deliberate steps to make sure that their animals are getting enrichment are, again, probably doing a lot other things because they're going that extra mile to make sure not only their customers are being taken care of, but their animals have the best possible life that they can give. The next sign of a really good breeder is attention to detail. So when it comes to breeding animals, especially ball pythons, there's so much that goes into it that when you are selling that animal to a new person, there's often a lot of questions. And maybe these questions are something as simple as, what was the pairing? Or it could be, when was the last time that this animal ate? Things like that. And breeders who are able to keep track of all of that information and provide it to their customers, that attention to detail is, again, a pattern that they are willing to put in all of the work, even if it's tedious and it's just simply documenting when was the last time that the animal ate, even though the animal's doing really, really well. All of these things are signs of a really, really good breeder. So again, if you're trying to figure out whether or not it is somebody who is bad or good, ask them questions about what was the pairing, when was the last time it ate, what are they eating right now. Simple questions like that will really, really help you find out whether or not the breeder knows what they're doing. Third sign of good breeders is that it is obvious that they are proud to be in the hobby and they are proud of their business because they are putting in all of the work to show how amazing and how much they believe in themselves and their animals that they're willing to invest in high quality tablecloths, banners, display cases, lights, all of these different things, professional photography, all of these different aspects that aren't directly related to the animals, in my opinion, is a sign that somebody takes it very, very seriously and that they want to make sure that their animals are presented in the best possible light that they can. And again, it's a sign, in my opinion, of somebody who is a really, really good breeder. Fourth characteristic is that good breeders are almost always welcoming and supportive to new people in the hobby. They want to grow the hobby because they understand that it is bringing in the next generation that's going to make sure that everybody in our community is able to continue enjoying reptiles for years and years to come. So because of this, they don't deride new people. They don't get mad at new people for asking questions that some people might deem silly. Instead, they are super, super welcoming, and they will do everything they can to make sure that new people in the hobby have a good experience, and hopefully if they have a good experience, they stick around and they help promote the hobby as well, and it can continue to grow for everyone. Last pattern of a really good breeder is that not everything is going to be perfect, and everybody, even the best breeders, are going to make mistakes. But in my opinion, the biggest green flag for a good breeder is that if there is a mistake, whether it is the customer's fault or whether it is the breeder's fault, almost no questions asked, is willing to do whatever they can to make sure that they are making it right for that customer. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be the breeder's fault for them to make it right. If a customer purchases an animal and 6 months later it randomly dies, a good breeder is going to be like, I am so sorry, I can't believe that that happened. Is there anything that was going on that might have caused it? it, and once that breeder helps rectify any of the potential causes of it, that they're like, I want to make sure that you can get another animal when you're ready. Once you are, just let me know and I will 100% hook you up. That is a really, really good sign of a good breeder, rather than the breeder who hears that something happened to an animal that they had produced, even if it was 6 months ago, and they're like, it's your problem now. Again, all of these different aspects, whether this is from the garbage breeders or from the good breeders, on their own isn't enough to determine whether or not somebody is good or bad. But when you look at it overall, when you're looking at patterns of behavior, especially over time, it is a really, really good gauge to figure out who is worth supporting in the reptile hobby and who is somebody that you should probably stay away from. Anyways, we hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next week.